Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Pariyutam Vande Guru Paramparam Vishwaro Guratmeti Mochi Veda Vibhagine Vyomabda Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Sava Vedanta Sedanta Gocharam Tamagocharam Govindam Paramanantam Satguru Pranatoshmaham Om Om Shanti 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 Om. Namaste. Welcome to our Vivekachudamani. So we do a quick summary of the verse 70 because we covered some of it, but not all. If the world were real, the self would be affected by it. The Veda would cease to be a valid means of knowledge, and the one who created Veda would be a liar. So if the world were real, if there are two principles that can be denominated real, reality, the first thing would be like that duality is reality, because we would have the two principles, consciousness and the world that appears within consciousness. If the world is real, if consciousness is real, and then to begin with, duality would be reality and not non-duality. So, and as a consequence, we would have two realities and both could affect one another, because now we are back into the realm of duality in which everything keeps changing. The Veda would cease to be a valid means of knowledge and furthermore, a valid means for moksha, because there would be no freedom if the self would live on the same, exist in the same order of reality as the objects, the world of object. If both would stand on the same order of reality, both would be affecting one another because we would be in duality. So the Veda would cease to be a valid means for liberation. And the one who created Veda would be a liar. So the whole thing would crumble, and Vedanta would be seen like, or the Upanishads and the Vedic text would be seen as just fiction, or something like that. But as we know, there is great value in these scriptures revealed by the Lord Ishvara. And we know it firsthand because we are all experiencing the benefits of this knowledge. So we have seen here, according to the unfoldment of Dayananda, that the first consequence of the taking the world to be real would be, I read here, the second consequence. What is the first consequence according to our Dayananda?
Third paragraph.
Third paragraph. The first consequence is that if there were no unchanging substratum, all would be in a flux of change. So if the self would be on the same order of reality as the changing world, the self would be changing as well, and then there would be no means, there will be no consciousness, this unchanging, never modifying consciousness to capture the world of change. So we need a changeless background in order to witness and experience the changing world. So this would be the first consequence, is that there will be no unchanging background or unchanging substratum, and all would be in a flux of change. That is, if objects were real, the self would be defined by the objects, because both would be defining one another. Both are subject to change. Both belong to the same order of reality. So there will be no freedom, there will be no moksha, because moksha is the realization of that which is free and independent from the world of change. That which is free and does not change in contact with experience, does not change, in contact with experience. So that is freedom, and that freedom would not be possible because the self would be changing. So the whole idea is just absurd. But Vedanta likes to present these ideas so that we can clear our doubts and suspiciousness and so on. But this is impossible, for it would mean that change would define what's real. Yet change can only be known in relation to that which does not change. So this is a very simple, clear logic. We can witness, know, and experience the changing world because we are the unchanging principle. Although we tend to identify with the body-mind complex, it feels that we are stable and not change, but then in retrospect, we see that we keep changing. The body keeps changing, the intellect state, the mental state is changing, the emotional body is changing. So we keep, the equipment keeps changing, but as we know, what we are is this unchanging, never modifying, nirvikara principle called consciousness. So consciousness, the self, is the unchanging substratum that makes change intelligible. If that were removed, the world would become unintelligible. So we will never be able to know anything. So this is a very interesting logic, because we believe that we know things through the changing mind, you understand? But the knowledge we have is due to the unchanging conscious principle, Consciousness is the principle that allows us to know the changing world. We do so through the changing equipment called the body-mind complex, you understand? That is changing. But the principle, consciousness of our true nature, is what allows us to know the changing phenomenal world of objects. We would not be able to talk about what is real. We would not be able to talk at all, for words are symbols by which we relate changing objects to unchanging existence. Oh, how nice it is one, huh? So words are nothing but symbols that we use to interact with the changing world of objects, and describe the experience, describe this interaction. We relate to this changing world of objects, and we can talk about it because there is consciousness, the unchanging principle by which we can capture the changing world of objects. But if consciousness would be the intellect, as last class I was pointing to that direction in this verse, if we take the consciousness to be the changing subtle body, the changing jiva, and then we get confused. We think like, oh, I'm changing, the world is changing, and I can't really figure out what's real here. But that's not the case. Otherwise, we will not be able to talk about reality. In fact, we will not be able to talk about the changing world because we we use words which are symbols. And these symbols is the means by which we can relate, we can express our experience in contact with the changing object. The changing object is somehow determined, is somehow interpreted, by words, symbols. The intellect uses words, symbols, and sentence to describe this experience of consciousness in contact with the changing world of objects. This is happening against the background of the unchanging self, unchanging consciousness, and then another use the word existence. When we say the table exists, just to shift into this teaching about consciousness and existence as synonymous. So he used the word existence. When we say the table exists, it means that existence, which underlies everything, is manifest in a particular and transitory form convention known as a table. When the table disappears, as it will be in time, existence does not disappear with it. So we looked into it last class and in previous occasions as well. We know that existence and consciousness are like the two sides of the same coin. Okay? So we know that we exist, and we know that we exist because we are conscious of our existence. Our existence and our consciousness, is the same principle, and it is limitless by nature. That's therefore we have Sat Chitananda. This existence, consciousness, which is our very nature, is limitless in its nature. And when we say that things exist, it means to say that everything is consciousness. Even if certain things, they are made out of a predominance of tamoguna, if they don't shine with sentience, yet they are made out of consciousness. Why? Because we know that exists, and the object, any inert object, exists due to consciousness, and consciousness and existence is the same thing. We know that consciousness is in this mouse. Why? Because this mouse exists, and existence is not part, it's not property or product of matter. Okay? So existence of anything is not a part, product, or property of matter. All existence exists within the non-dual existence called self, consciousness. The second consequence of taking the world to be real is that the Veda could no longer be considered a valid means of knowledge. We might say, so what? What advantage accrues to me from the Veda being considered a valid means of knowledge? Although it may not be immediately apparent, the invalidation of the Veda as a means of self-knowledge and moksha would leave us in inescapable darkness and despair. So we also covered that last time in reference, within the context of what we see in the world nowadays. There is so much materialism and violation of this natural laws called Dharma, the Dharma field, and its rules and laws that regulates and maintains everything in harmony. So there is so much, the human jivas are breaking these laws right and left so widely that the materialist people took over, and they have been rejecting the Vedas. And as I mentioned before, I heard Swami Paramarthananda mentioning that this several times, even already 10, 20 years ago. He used to say, the Vedic culture, unfortunately, seems to be declining, So if we lose this Vedic culture, which is body of spiritual religious knowledge that was revealed by Ishvara, by consciousness, if we lose it, and then we are in an inescapable darkness and despair. Why? Because we removed God from the equation of life. We only believe that there is matter, We don't understand that matter is something that appears within consciousness. We just reject the notion of consciousness. We take consciousness to be the human mind. We take the human jiva to be the king of this universe. And then we go about creating darkness, suffering, and despair in this planet. So in verse number 1, we were told that perception, our usual means of knowledge, cannot help us to know the self. It can only tell us something about objects, the not self. Inference is usually considered another means of knowledge, but it's based upon perception and cannot be separate from perception. What means of knowledge do we have then that can reveal to us our true nature as limitless consciousness, existence, and joy. This text presents our nature as security and joy again and again, and bliss, joy, satisfaction. So, what means of knowledge do we have if the intellect and the perception, the organs of perception, the mind and the intellect, they are not proper means of knowledge to know the self. So what kind of means of knowledge we have to know our true nature? That's the we have been revisiting this point again and again and again and again. So what am I left with here? How can I know my true nature as limitless conscious existence? No? Only one, only one. The words of the Upanishads, the scriptures of Lord Ishvara revealed to the Jivas, not created by the Jivas. So this knowledge, the words of the Upanishads, unfold by a valid teacher. If these means of knowledge were removed, we would be restricted to what we know, what can be known by perception and inference. Inference is just perception, that we can sum up and we can infer, based on previous experience, which are all based on perceptive knowledge, and then we can infer, and then we can have knowledge of certain phenomena, which are not really available to us directly through our perceptions right now, but we can infer. So we would be restricted to the objective knowledge, the so-called scientific knowledge, objective knowledge, to know phenomenal objects, scientific knowledge. So it's all about that, but scientific knowledge is extrovert towards the objects, the changing world of objects, and self-knowledge, the knowledge about the unchanging self, that which never modifies in contact with the changing world of objects. So now we have this situation that we need a means of knowledge to know the knower, okay, the unchanging knower. And the only means of knowledge is the Upanishads. If we would be left to perception and perception alone, we would be cast into a world of objects that come and go, and we would find ourselves numbered among these countless passing phenomena, unable to transcend them. So we would just look for ourselves in the world of objects, and then we would find ourselves, like when we look for our true nature, and we take our true nature to be the mind or the intellect, you understand? And then we are in the same situation described here. We would find ourselves numbered among these countless objects, because the mind, the intellect, is another object. We would be like trying to find ourselves in countless, numberless other phenomenal objects, unable to really sort out and transcend the world of objects. Why? Because we are looking for ourselves in the wrong place. So if we look to ourselves in the world of object of experiencing, we are looking the wrong direction. You probably heard me telling the story about that old lady. She lives in the countryside in a farm, and she was there just fixing some socks from her grandchildren. And then she lost her needle. She lost her needle. And then she started seeking and searching for this needle again and again, and looking. And then there was another woman, much younger, going by and saw that old lady really looking around the house. There was this balcony, and she was looking for this needle. And then the young lady said, let me go there and help this older woman, I have better eyes and so on. And she went there and asked her, so, may I help you? What are you looking for? I said, I was just doing this and I lost my needle. That was my only needle, and I want to finish my job here. And then the young woman started helping her, looking for the needle. And then after 5 minutes, the lady says, but your balcony, your veranda is so, extensive here. So can you tell me more or less where you dropped it? And then you know what the lady told the young woman? The old woman say, no, I left it, I dropped it inside in the kitchen. And then the young lady said, see, why? Then why are we looking outside here? And she said, because there is light, you know? So this is very symbolic because our mind is extrovert, you know, towards towards the objects, you know, by the sense organs. They go where there are objects, you know. They don't want to go and look in a place which we could say it's dark. It's dark because it's not really out there in the visible physical material world. We have to do this inner work of self-inquiry, understand? Which is not natural to the mind and the intellect, because our equipments, they are nature, they are extroverts to whatever there is light. Whatever light here is a nice symbol of objects, you know, experience, objects of experience. We tend to just go for object. In other words, we would be trapped in duality. There would be no escape from the pains of birth and death. There will be no escape from the desires and fears that haunt our lives. So this is the second consequence of taking the world to be real. Oh, now I remember. Here we go into some more philosophical analysis here. The sad hedonism, pursuit of pleasure that characterize our age is rooted in the belief that objects are all that exists. In other words, its root in perception is the sole means of knowledge. We have a huge value for sensory experience, you know, sensory experience in connecting its respective objects. So we have a huge value. We believe that life, all there is to life is to extract pleasure from these sensory objects of perceptions, you know. All this tendency is all this pursuit of pleasure is rooted in the perception as the only means of knowledge. Perception, and then when we go into another field of knowledge, inferential knowledge, and then we start believing that there is a certain pleasure which is an intellectual pleasure, which is possible through inquiry, through inferential knowledge, which is not just perceptive, sensorial experience, you know. So we go from the pursuit of sensorial pleasures to the ones of inferential contemplations and knowledge. So as different means of knowledge, but yet we don't have a means of knowledge to know the knower. So the French thinker and writer believed that we can know nothing beyond this world of objects, and he found this limitation an intolerable cruelty. So there are a lot of people who really understood, they have a certain philosophical approach to life, and they want to know more, more than the eyes can see and the skin can touch and so on. And then they come to the conclusion that there is nothing more to be known but matter, phenomenon, object. Everything is energy / object. And then this guy comes with this conclusion that he found this an incredible limitation. We can only know phenomenal object. And this is intolerable. It's cruel. He counseled what he called metaphysical rebellion, which in effect is nothing more than anger and despair over the unrelieved alienation that comes from thinking that the world is real, that we are but one more among the objects that come and go for reasons we cannot fathom. That's the situation of every scientist who are totally extrovert towards phenomenal object. They, in the end, they feel this frustration, you know, that they may know more than the average people in terms of objective knowledge, but yet, you know, they feel like, I mean, everything that I know here is subject to error and revision and correction and so on, and I know nothing, you understand? Nothing that is really real, nothing that I can say this is a real knowledge, not subject to mistake. You know? So it's as if we are just one object among other objects, and we are just lost in this universe for reasons we cannot fathom. For delivering, for delivering to his contemporaries this dark message, he was awarded a Nobel Prize. So he got a Nobel Prize because he presented this. He was so pissed off, and he presented this is absurd. You know, what are we doing here? Huh? We try to know things, but we cannot know anything for real. There is nothing real here. Things are not really what they seem to be. So we are just, you know, I don't want to say that word, but we are doomed. You know, but not long before his death, Comes is said to have consulted Jane Klein, a teacher of Vedanta living in Paris. His report to have remarked at the conclusion of this meeting when he said, I cannot believe it. That is, Camus could not accept that the declarations of the Upanishads are true. So he was like, wow, how could I waste my entire life, you know, observing and scrutinizing and analyzing and trying to understand the object, and I never looked back to observe the subject consciousness principle, that which illumines and reveals all these objects. How could I miss it? You know, I'm looking for reality in the changing world of phenomenal object, and no, I never brought into the equation the light of consciousness, that know this changing phenomenal object, which are not real. They are always changing. So he was really shocked. So there are consequences to consider the Veda an invalid means of knowledge. If we doubt it, we need only look around us. So it will be despair. It will be like, oh my God, what are we doing here? Because it seems that our despair sooner or later takes us to the Upanishads. Sooner or later takes us to Vedanta. You know, because Vedanta is the only body of knowledge, the only revealed body of knowledge that's going to point us to the right direction. You say, hey, you want to find a solution and resolve your human condition through knowledge. That's fair enough. But, you know, don't look out there. You know, you have to follow the logic as presented by the Upanishads and understand the subject, not the object. You know, take a good look and see for yourself, you know, that the only reality is the light of the subject conscious existence principle. That's the only reality. So we would have no way out of samsara, and that is something very, very scary. The third consequence of considering the world to be real is that one who created the Veda would be a liar. So who created the Veda? That is the means of knowledge to the self. The verse number one, the teacher is salute as himself. This means that the self, pure awareness, or Ishvara, has given us the science of self-knowledge through the Upanishads. We should not confuse this knowledge with the religious doctrines. So the third consequence of considering the world to be real is that the Vedas would be lying, you know, and then we will have to say that Ishvara would be a liar, you know, and consciousness or Brahmana would be a liar, because this knowledge was not really originate and offered by any jiva. It's very easy to blame a jiva and to say, you a liar. You did not get it right. I know better than you. But we know that this is a revealed knowledge coming all the way from consciousness, with Ishvara as the first teacher and Shankaracharya as the middle, and our gurus nowadays as our teachers. So it's a tradition that comes from the very beginning. So if we say that the Vedas, that duality is reality, is the self exists in the same order of reality because it changes, and then we would have to doubt Ishvara and Brahman, because that's where this knowledge comes from. In verse number 1, the teacher is saluted as the self. This means that the self, pure consciousness, has offered us, has given us this science of reality, science of self-knowledge through the Upanishads, through the Rishis, and through Ishvara. Consciousness through Ishvara, through the Rishi has revealed, unfold these teachings for us. We should not confuse this knowledge with religious doctrines. Yeah. Vedanta is not mysticism, but neither is it a philosophy produced by human thought. Philosophy, like mysticism, is dependent upon perception. That is, it originates through a subject experiencing objects, internal or external. So in the case of mysticism, it's a subject, jiva, experience some internal objects, those very subtle objects, that we call those epiphanies. Mysticism is nothing but epiphanies that people try to describe, and present these very subtle objects as the ultimate reality. So that's a way of presenting mysticism. And philosophy, in that case, it's dependent upon intellectual configurations, intellectual, analysis about the meaning of the world, or meaning of words, and so on. That is, it originates through a subject experiencing objects, experience thought, playing with thoughts, analyzing thoughts, words, and some mystical, esoteric phenomena, and so on. And synthesizing those experiences into ideas that purport to explain the cause of the phenomenal world. That's nicely put. So they are trying to organize those experiences, those intellectual configurations and so on, and in words to explain, our phenomenal experience, the experience of the phenomenal world. Philosophy, like religion, has its origin in perception. All philosophy, all religions, even spiritual knowledge has its origin in perception. All knowledge is based on perception, and even self-knowledge depends on perceptive knowledge, because the body of knowledge that Ishvara presents to us is nothing but our perceptive experience, the experience that we have through perception and inference, that are re-examined in the light of Vedanta and present to us, so that we can come to the conclusion that we are not the three bodies, we are not the five sheets, we are not the three states, we are not any of these experiences, relate to the five sheets. So in order to get to that understanding, we have to go through perception. Philosophy, like religion, like spirituality, has its origin in perception. So Vedanta, self-knowledge, is not perceptive knowledge, but it's a fructification or manifestation of a process of analyzing our experience, which is all based on our perceptive knowledge, you know. I don't know if I'm making myself clear enough, you know. Vedanta makes use of perception. Now maybe it's going to make it more clear here. Vedanta makes use of perception, but it's not enclosed by it, not dependent upon it. We use perceptive knowledge, perception and inference, so that we can re-examine our experience until we are convinced, you know, because every knowledge it depends on the field of experience, the field of objects, and we have come to the mistaken conclusion that we are the body mind. Now we have to re-examine this firm conviction that I am the body mind, and we have to use this field of objects and then the knowledge of perception and inference that we have accumulated, which is basically ignorance in respect to our true nature. We have to re-examine all of that, and through knowledge, which is fundamentally, originally based on perception and inference, we're going to cancel the other knowledge. And then we are left with self-knowledge, which is not based on perception, but it's what we call aparoksha jnana, which is direct and immediate knowledge, because it does not involve the knower and any object which requires the subtle body and the perceptive organs and the intellect and so on. It's just the knower knowing itself. Understand? The knower knowing itself. And then there is no room for perception, because the self is not an object of perception. The self is not an object of knowledge, can never be objectified. It can be known in the intellect as the subject. No? It can be known as the light of the subject knower, but it can never be objectified. So it's not an object of perception. But Vedanta makes use of perception, but it's never enclosed or dependent upon it. So dependent in the sense that ultimately self-knowledge is direct and immediate knowledge, which does not require perception and inference. Understand that some people make a confusion because they believe that self-knowledge is inferential knowledge. No, self-knowledge is not inferential knowledge. It's not just a understanding intellectual, the same way people have these very complex mathematical equations that are based on a lot of inference, you know. No, self-knowledge is a direct knowledge, because we are that which is always ever present, shining, the most obvious things. But it's so obvious, so simple, that somehow it is overlooked. So we need this Vedanta body of knowledge, which is based on perception and inference, so to neutralize or cancel, remove those wrong ideas in a way that we can know ourselves. So how can the self know itself? How can the jiva know itself? It can only know itself by understanding that he is the knower. The knower can never be known. The perceiver can never be perceived. The experiencer can never be experienced. You understand? So how are we going to know ourselves? As the knower, as the perceiver, as the experiencer, you know, the light, consciousness. And that knowledge is not perceptive knowledge, and it's not intellectual knowledge either, although it happens in the intellect, but it's not intellectual knowledge. It's not inferential knowledge in that sense. As we follow the logic of Vedanta, we may be liable to mistake its conclusions as originating in human reason, which cannot be separated from objective knowledge. While logic supports Vedanta, it does not inform it. Nice. Huh? Logic supports Vedanta. Vedanta is a body of knowledge based on analysis of experience, and it's all logic. Logic is what, you know, holds this body of knowledge so that it can work its magic. but it does not inform Vedanta. You know, It supports Vedanta, but Vedanta does not really is originate by logic, meaning to say the human mind did not originate Vedanta. Vedanta is utilize logic. We relate to logic as a byproduct of the human intellect. But no, logic supports Vedanta, but it does not inform it. There is simply no way a human being could arrive at self-knowledge through reflection upon the objects of perception and inference. There's no way. And we go a long way trying to make the impossible possible, to find the self as an object of knowledge, of perception, nor through another mystical experience. And then there are those that have these vasanas for epiphanies and mystical, huh? And they say, no, I mean, this time I felt I was enlightened, I was free, I was happy, but then the experience just ran out, run down, or howsoever we say, and then now I feel again small, limited, and inadequate and insufficient and so on. I feel unhappy again. So no, it's not gonna do. We can't say that okay, another epiphany will set me free, but won't. For such experience cannot be transmitted and their truth tested, as it is the case with Vedanta. So all this mystical experience, they are only, Ramji likes to say, or in our tradition, we hear that, so an experience is only as good as our interpretation of that experience. The same experience can have different interpretations on different minds. Understand? So this experience can never be a valid body or means of self-knowledge because they are personal, they are conditioned by one who had that experience and interpret that experience according to its vasana. So therefore, it can never be transmitted as a valid means of self-knowledge. That to say that self-knowledge is not an object of perception and it's not an object of experience, not even those mystical experience, most brilliant mystical esoteric experience is an object. An object is anything that can be seen, perceived, and experienced. And if it is objectified by our intellect, it's the not self. Therefore, it's not self-knowledge. It's knowledge in reference to object. Self-knowledge comes from the self. Self-knowledge comes from the self. Indeed, it is the self. We are now posed on the precipice of the most profound and radical fact. We are not human beings. We are the self. That is a shocking good news, huh? For all of us, we still think, we are a person, and we're still having some doubts here. So we have this situation. We are at the precipice of the most profound fact in a human life. We are not a person. We are not human beings, but we are the self. This is what all of the previous negations were leading us to realize. So we negate our identity as dependent on any of these phenomenal objects. I'm not these, I'm none of these things, anything that can be known, perceived, and experienced. I am not. No, we negate everything to bring us to this realization, right? That I am none of these objects that I perceive. I'm the knower of everything. Therefore, I'm not this body mind, because this body mind I perceive. In other words, I'm not this person. I'm not my story of life. I'm not my memory, recollection. I'm none of these objects. This is all the not self. This can be shocking, but it's the most liberating knowledge. So, and all this work of Vedanta takes us to the edge of this precipice, the most radical fact in a human life, that we are not a person, we are not human beings, we are the self. Anything and everything we can perceive is the not self. If it were the self, that is, if the world were real, then the pure awareness that has given us Vedanta would be a liar. If this were so, then we would be forever barred from knowing the truth. We'll never be able to know the truth. We would be locked inside our sense-based minds, this hook to these objects, and life is all about knowing about matter, phenomenal, energy, where doubts never cease. Doubts never cease. If there is no knowledge, objective knowledge, knowledge of matter, of energy, this extroverted intellect will never know something that will really satisfy his search for knowledge. Because the more he knows, the more he realizes that he knows almost nothing, because everything that we know just opens up more and more these windows of ignorance ahead of, oh my God, look, now I understood this, and now I just become aware so much more. Before, my ignorance was very small, and now that I know more, I realize my ignorance is much, much wider. No? So there is no knowledge that can really satisfy the search for knowledge. That's how Vedanta, one of the definitions of Vedanta is the knowledge that puts an end for this seeking, searching for knowledge. Is the knowledge that, the only knowledge that can resolve this human, this existential condition of insatisfaction, of not knowing and trying to find satisfaction through knowledge. Of course, we try to find satisfaction through security and pleasure, but then we go into the third human pursuit, which is knowledge. And then we have to transcend these tendencies to know, to find freedom by objective knowledge. And then we move into the fourth human pursuit, which is the pursuit of self-knowledge. Anxiety would be perpetual by compelling us to consider the consequence of taking the world to be real. The teacher has shown us the alternative to Vedanta. The alternative to this Vedic knowledge is darkness, delusion, and despair, occasionally alleviated by moments of pleasure, with life ending in death and meaninglessness. Oh, I hope that this phrase, this sentence did not get anybody depressed, but it's very accurate, huh? So if we would take the world to be real, anxiety would be perpetual by compelling us to consider the consequence of taking the world to be real. The teacher has shown us the alternative to Vedanta, meaning darkness, delusion, and despair, occasionally alleviated by moments of satisfaction, pleasure, with life ending in death and meaninglessness. Is this not, in fact, the worldview of the Western intelligentsia? Even the consolation of an imaginary heaven in the afterlife is excluded, for even God could be a liar, a proposition considered by Descartes and reject more through faith in a perfect creator than through reason argument. So we would not have even the consolation, okay, we are really, here we have no way out. This is just hell. Hell is here now. I mean, I remember hearing some people when I was a child, oh, no, there is no heaven and hell. There is heaven, but hell is here because it's really tough down here, So we would be in that kind of situation, and then we would not even, if we really would use our intellect, we try to resolve this human problem by ourselves. So say, okay, we go through reasoning, intellectual knowledge, try to scrutinize and philosophize and everything. And now we're going to destroy this notion of God, this notion of heaven. And now we don't have even that consolation. So we are just, we are just done because we have rejected Ishwara, Brahman, God, Ishwara, the Vedic culture, the Vedic knowledge, the concept of Ishwara as the Lord. With the moment that we reject everything, and then we don't have even the Creator, we don't have Ishwara, we don't understand this, the laws governing our human experience, and we would end up in total despair. But Vedanta is supported by reason argument. Don't make me wrong. So the argument here is like, don't take me wrong, don't make me wrong. Vedanta is supported by reason, that the self could be a liar. Suppose that the self has perceptions that can be judged true or false. By whom and based on what criteria? But the self has no content, no perceptions, which is what Vedanta means when it claims the self is beyond what exists and what doesn't exist. It is no perfect creator, as Descartes imagined, whose integrity requires that we accept the world of perceptions being real. Such an acceptation is shown to be baseless, and the following verse reinforces the point. So we're going to have more to this conversation in the following verse. So the verse 71. The self, which declares the truth about its nature, say, I am not in things and beings. They are in me. This is a nice declaration or statement that we find in the Gita as well, Krishna saying that as well. So everything is in me, but you'll never find me in any of this. I'm not in any of these things. Everything is in me. The self consciousness declares through the Upanishads, as the Upanishads, as this knowledge, which is not separate from the self, as the previous verse, the commentaries of Dayananda said that self-knowledge, in fact, is the self which declares the truth, through the Upanishads about its true nature, say, I am not in things, I am not in these beings, living beings, they are all in me. So this is a very nice point to be understood, because it's about a common mistake or misunderstanding between Satya and Mithya and the superimposition of Mithya in Satya. Understand? We have to understand that what we are, consciousness, is that which is the only reality, and everything that appears as a superimposition on the only reality, which is consciousness. Okay? So everything is appearing in consciousness, but consciousness is not in anything. Understand? Consciousness is free and independent of everything, and everything enjoys a certain degree of existence which depends on consciousness, because they are just projections of consciousness. They are names and forms attached or projected or superimposed in consciousness. The light of consciousness, the light of the knowledge of the knower. So we have this thing that we need to understand clearly, not to get confused. Vedanta can be confusing, which is why we need a teacher. The confusion arises when we fail to distinguish the levels of understanding from which statements are made. On the level of the individual, objects exist. When that individual is told that the self is all there is, he may conclude that objects are the self, and they may impart limitless existence to the objects. You understand? So when the student here, we need to understand Satya and Mithya. You understand that in Mithya, so this order of reality, which is an appearance, Okay, it's an apparent order of reality. So there are distinctions between objects. Every object, it is a configuration projected by Maya Ishwara, and everything has its own distinction, okay? And they exist in space-time. But all of this dimension, the entire dimension here, is just a superimposition. It's exactly like to have the gold and the ornaments of gold. So we have the fundamental, substantial nature of all ornaments to be only gold. And then when we start superimpose names and forms of gold and say, this is a ring, this is a hair, this is a collar, or whatever. Okay, so we are saying that, oh, now we have gold, we have gold which became a ring, became a hearing. No, gold does not become anything. It's our mind somehow has superimposed a name to a certain form of gold, and now we call it a hearing. So this hearing of gold exists in the gold. It depends on the gold, but the gold does not really exist in the hearing or in the ring, in the sense that the gold does not depend on the ring, does not depend on the ring, the cord, because the gold is free and independent of its shape and form. Understand? So the same way says consciousness, I'm not in things and beings. Everything depends on me, but I'm not in everything. The gold is not really in the ring. The ring is in the gold. Understand? The clay is not in the pot, in the jar. The jar is in the clay. The pot is in the clay. Everything enjoys its appearance, nature as a pot, and so on, due to clay, which is its true nature, its substantial nature, the only reality to all these objects of clay in the same way. We need to understand that confusion arises when we fail to distinguish the levels of understanding from which certain statements are made. A lot of the time we make confusion because we do not contextualize, we take certain statements of the scriptures and we pull out of its context, and then we miss out. We get confused. We need to understand the level of understanding, the context in which certain affirmations are presented by the Upanishads. For example, on the level of the individual, the objects exist from the standpoint of individual. What is the individual jiva? Is an object with three bodies that reflects consciousness and finds itself identified with the body as the body. The moment that it becomes the individual jiva, firmly identified with the body as the body, he sees the other objects within space-time as apart and distant from them. So on the level of the individual, the other objects exist and the other objects are uniquely designed. There is no two flakes of snow in the Himalayas which are the same. Everything is singular in its constitution. So when we see from the standpoint, I am the body, mind, jiva, everything appears as duality. I and the objects that appear to me, I take myself to be the subject until I come to understanding objective view of myself, and then I begin seeing myself objectively, and then I know that the body-mind construct is an object among many other objects, and then I begin establishing my identity as consciousness, that in which this body-mind appears and through which I experience the other objects in my environment. So therefore, on the level of the individual, the object exists. When that individual is told that everything is the self, what is the common mistake people do? Oh, there is only oneness, everything is the self, there is only consciousness, I am consciousness, and everything is consciousness, and this cup is consciousness, And then I start believing that the cup is real and has real value, and my friends are real. Everything, every object is real. I take objects to be real. And then when I see, I get caught up into the world of objects because I am overvaluing objects. I'm not keeping a clear understanding that these objects, they are just name, colors, and forms. Name, colors, and forms, of that which is the only reality, which is consciousness. So if I take the other objects to be the self, I will be confused. We may conclude that objects are the self, and we impart limitless pleasure and joy and happiness in the objects. You understand? If everything is the self, and then every object is the self, and then I can go there and enjoy everything because everything is inherently, yeah, filled with limitless joy and sukha and so on. And that's the understanding. In other words, we may come to believe that the snake is real because the rope is real. This is very nice. I would say, oh my God, I thought that it was a snake. No? And then later on, oh, okay, it's not a snake. It's a rope. I say, wow, it was just a rope. No? And then I know rope is the only reality here. But if I believe that everything is a rope, and then I may make a mistake. And then I believe that snake is real because the rope is real. If everything is the rope, so everything is consciousness. And I was seeing matter, I was seeing changing objects as reality, you understand? And then I discovered that the only reality is consciousness. And then if I misunderstand these statements of Upanishads, when they say that everything is consciousness, and then I may superimpose such a mithya, and then I say, oh, the objects are also the self, and they are filled with limitless joy, security, and satisfaction. I take the snake to be real because the rope is real. I take the world to be real because the self is real. You understand? So the self is not in everything. Everything is in the self. The self is the only reality. And all objects are the not self enjoying a certain degree of existence, which is dependent and borrowed by consciousness. But the objects are never by nature limitless in nature. So they are never to be really a source of limitless joy and security in that sense. In other words, we may come to believe that the snake is real because the rope is real, failing to distinguish their difference. Now, it is true that the snake illusion could not exist if there were no rope. So, oh, the snake depends on the rope. Yeah? So the rope is the only reality. Now the snake is not real. But how is it not real if it depends on the rope and the rope is real? We hear this in the spiritual world again and again. Oh, Brahman is the only reality. And if everything, Brahman is real, if he creates the world must be of the same nature as Brahman. It must be real. You understand? So no, it creates it apparently projects by its power called Maya. It appears to project his world called Mithya, this order of reality. But this order of reality it's almost as good as non-existent because it's not real. You understand? It's not real. So it's not real. Therefore, only reality is consciousness, and we do not need to make mistake to believe that the world is an extension of Brahman, therefore it is going to be enjoy the same degree of reality as Brahman. Why? Because Brahman is the only reality. The world is not real. Understand? It's just a projection, it's a mirage, it's a phenomenon, superimposition. It's not really real. So we easily see this misunderstanding, the superimposition of mithya in satya and satya in mithya. When we import reality to the world of objects, we superimpose satya and mithya. We have to be careful and understand this distinction. It is further true that all illusion is only possible because of awareness. So the superimposition called the world, the cosmos, the universe, is only possible because of awareness, consciousness. But consciousness does not do anything. Maya does that. And Maya does the impossible possible. It creates an order of reality called mithya, which is almost as good as non-existent because it's just a superimposition on gold, a superimposition on the clay. All this variety of objects that we experience in the universe is just consciousness, it's just existence. Oh, and then the cosmos is also real because it's all consciousness. No, 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 because the cosmos is not real. Consciousness is real. You understand the point? Consciousness is real. So it this exists not apart from consciousness. Consciousness is the only reality. This mithya depends on consciousness. Consciousness is free and independent of the mithya, the world, because the world is as good as non-existent. These are one of the most radical statements of the Upanishads. It's just an illusion, a superimposition of names and forms. It is further true that all illusion is only possible because of consciousness, on which the illusion, the projection, the movie project on the screen, yeah, the cinema screen in the cinema hall. Now, it's only possible because of consciousness, on which it is superimposed, but the self is not contained in the illusion. The self is not contained in the superimposition. The superimposition is contained in the self, the same way that projection is contained on the screen. The screen is not contained in the projection. But the self is not contained in the illusion any more than the rope is contained in the snake. We know that the rope is not contained in the self. The snake was an illusion due to excess of tamas or rajas. In that metaphor, it was excess of tamas. And then we see in the late afternoon, we mistake the rope to be a snake. So what are we going to do about this snake? You know, what kind of degree of reality does this snake offer, you know? It depends on the real thing. Without the real thing, it would not appear. It appears due to the real thing, but at the same time, there is no association, there is no connection. You understand? The snake is a superimposition by the intellectual mind of the jiva that projects. You know, this world is a superimposition of Maya Shwara that project the universe on consciousness. The beings that are perceived as separate objects have no reality. That is, they are not self-existent. They depend on the self to exist. They are not self-luminous. They appear in awareness. They are made out of awareness. They are sustained by awareness. They are destroyed by consciousness. Everything is happening in this secondary order of reality is happening due to consciousness, but consciousness is not doing anything. Maya is projecting. Okay, projected, and consciousness has no association with any of that, but consciousness remains as the substratum, the space in which this projection takes place. All of these appear in awareness and consciousness. Consciousness does not appear in any of that. These may be difficult to follow, but the distinction being made in this verse is of great practical importance. Many scandals and much suffering can be laid at the doorstep of the failure to understand that the self is not in objects, although all objects appear in the self. So when we take that the objects, the self is contained also in the objects, we easily can make the mistake of saying, oh, all is the self. So we can go and enjoy all objects of the world and enjoy them, through my perception. I can enjoy any kind of object because everything is the self. So we can do what we want. I know that I am the self. I know that everything is the self. And therefore, I go about enjoying everything as if the objects really who are infused with limitless joy, security, and existence. So this is a common misunderstanding that we find in the market, spiritual market among the gurus. I think that's where it is going here. Many scandals and much suffering can be laid at the doorstep of the failure to understand that the self is not in objects, although objects appear in the self. It is to prevent such misunderstanding that this text has expended much time in detail on the qualifications for receiving this teaching. So this is point to something that's very common. Some people, they were never taught the Upanishad. They were never taught these teachings of Vedanta. And somehow they have what they often call awakening. They have a realization, a moment of clarity about the nature of reality. And then they take everything to be consciousness. All there is consciousness, and I am consciousness, all is consciousness. But he was never taught the entire body of knowledge. At the most, they were in contact with some fragments of the Jnana Yoga of Vedanta. And they were never taught Mithya, so they don't know how to understand Mithya in the context of such and such in the context of Mithya. And then they are very much confused. And then they do things that are totally inappropriate. Okay? And it is to prevent such a misunderstanding that this text has expended much time in detail on the qualifications for receiving these teachings and the need to be taught these teachings before you can begin teaching others about self-realization and enlightenment. Because otherwise, if you are not properly taught Satya and Mithya, self-knowledge and Ishvara knowledge, you're going to mix up one with the other, and you're going to confuse people. And a lot of the time, you're going to behave in such a way that is going to even further confuse people's minds. When unqualified people lay hold of the great teachings of the Upanishads, their lack of discrimination and dispassion, they are really not properly prepared, purified. They are still infused with a lot of passion. The discrimination is under pressure from their vasanas. So the people lacking these qualifications, discrimination and dispassion, they can produce regrettable behavior. One is still very much inclined to believe that happiness is also in the object because everything is the self. Oh yeah, the self and the objects as well. And then let's go for it because everything is the self. One is still very much inclined to believe that happiness is in the objects because everything is the self. Is like to conclude, if all is the self, then it doesn't matter what I do. Let me enjoy all what the world has to offer. I can just go and enjoy myself. Let's party. In effect, the ego, identified with the body-mind, assumes it has carte blanche to gratify its sense pleasure, the desires for pleasure in the name of self-realization. And I have seen that, and I know some of my old friends more or less stuck in that situation. Just present themselves as great gurus and is still going for sensory pleasures, believing that everything is consciousness and there is no harm. And Osho Rajneesh had certain responsibility in promoting that idea, the idea of the Zorba, the Buddha. You know you're Buddha, and then you can go and enjoy all the pleasure that the world can offer to you, because everything is allowed, everything is consciousness, everything is real. In other words, in the context of this verse, fantastic self-indulgence. Recall Rajneesh 93 Rolls Royce. Sexual license and abuse of power ensue. The teachings of Vedanta are for mature people, that is, for those who have had enough of the world and its distractions, not for those still obsessed with sex, power, money, prestige, and pleasures. Unfortunately, Western seekers often have little preparation to receive these teachings of the Upanishads. It's true, which may excite them to rash behavior based on misconceptions, because they receive it from teachers that were not taught, teachers who are still confused. Naive, self-deluded, or exploitative teachers can make matters worse. The great sayings, such as Tattvamasi, are intended to free us from dependence on objects. They are not intended to sink us further into the delusion, that the objects are real and they are source of joy and security. All of that in the name of enlightenment. The title of this work is the cross jewel of discrimination. Discrimination is the method Vedanta prescribes for knowing the self, one's true nature. And discrimination begins by identifying objects as the not self. We must be patient in learning to discriminate. And we must understand what the words employed in the teaching mean, according to the teaching tradition, which is called the Sampradaya. So the main tool of Vedanta is discriminating the self from the not self, the subject from the object. And this requires a great degree of subtlety and purity and focus and there is another expression, refinement of intellect. It has to be subtle, pure, refined to discriminate the subject from the object. Okay, so this is the most important, the main tool of Vedanta. But of course, we need to develop certain qualifications so that this discrimination tool can be efficiently exercised. So in this discrimination is intended to free us, not to get us even more further delusion. The title of this work is the cross jewel of the discrimination. And this discrimination is the method offered by Vedanta. We must be patient in learning how to discriminate, and we must understand what the words employed in the teaching mean, according to the tradition which is passed over and over again from the teacher to the student to who becomes a teacher. It goes like that, from teacher to the student and so on. Vedanta needs to be taught. The not self, the objects, mithya, their existence is only apparent and depends upon satya, which is the only reality. The usual explanation of satya and mithya is by analogy, as we know. Satya is the essential nature of mithya. Satya is free and independent of mithya. enjoys a certain existence which is dependent on satya. And these analogies goes as the pot and the clay, the wave, the water, and the ocean, and the gold and the gold ornaments and so on. So in the case of the clay, the pot has no existence apart from the clay. In fact, there is no pot, properly speaking, but there is only clay. Before the pot is shaped, it is clay. After the pot is broken apart, there is only clay. While the pot appears intact, there is only clay. Clay is the substratum. Clay is the substantial nature of all objects of clay. It's the only reality. Pot is a superimposition. Pot is only an appearance in clay. Again, all appearance, all objects appear in consciousness. All objects of clay appears in clay. Clay is not contained in the objects of clay. The objects are contained in the clay. Pot is only an appearance in clay. Beings, which are objects, are superimposed on the self. O jiva is superimposed on the self. Yeah? Much like the pot is superimposed on the clay. Same analogy. So we are consciousness, but we tend to superimpose the human intellect on the self. And then we believe that the self is this body-mind construct. No, the self is not in the body-mind construct. The body-mind construct is within the self. And the jiva has the power, has the ability, intellectual ability, and the merit, the karmic merit to understand it by following the teachings of the Vivekachudamani, which is based on this statement that Vamansi, Jivaratma is Paramatma. And this requires this constant and persistent discrimination between the self and the not-self. The self is not in the object any more than the clay is in the pot. It's the other way around. In fact, there is only the self, as in reality, there is only clay. And so we end the verse 72 of our Vivekachudamani, and we'll meet again next Monday, beginning from verse 72. We finished the verse 71. So does anybody have anything to say, contribute? Any question? Any doubt?
It's just nice to be back together again.
Yeah, it's very nice to be back. Yeah, same thing here. Yeah. Okay, so I have recorded it. David made a note for me not to forget to record. And I will send the email to you, and we meet again on Monday. So if you want to revise this class today, and if you have any question, write down the questions for our next class or send it to me by email. Okay. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, everybody. We meet again soon. Ishwara willing, of course. Much love.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Thanks, Alan. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.